And we are live at Oz Property Investors. We bring the big names, and we got Joe and Felizi, and it's the heavyweight fight. Well, I was going to say maybe Joe, maybe.
Oh wait,
yeah. So how you going anyway, Felizi? You're apparently sweaty balls.
Yeah, I'm really good. It's about 35 degrees here in the UK at the moment, so definitely feeling heat.
The country's in lockdown; they can't handle it.
Yeah, I'm not nervous. It's not sweat from nervousness. It's just heat.
What?
Yeah, that's what everyone
What do you mean,
says.
Joe? They don't lock down over there.
Oh no! Like as soon as it gets hot, they lock down. As soon as it gets cold, they shut the whole place down. A little bit of snow, they
there you go.
The UK, not lockdown. Actually, is probably not the right word. You can't use that word anymore. They just shut the place down.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. How you going anyway, Joe? What's been happening? You been locked down?
I'm good. I've been looking into the world of commercial, and I've been really enjoying it. I am in the world of resi, and I love it. So I'm just glad I'm in my corner. I'm glad I'm in the blue corner here, fighting for residential. I'm pumped. How are you, Jeff? How was your day, mate? You're looking very sharp. Is this a new setup you've got here?
Oh, Joe knows. Yeah, I've got myself a new MacBook M2, so we're upping the. I mean, it's going to say up in the quality somewhat, but see how I go. Yeah, going really well. I just want to be able to keep looking at property more and more. So. And hopefully New South Wales get a win tonight as well. So I'm going to be watching it. So people want to throw out, we want to see questions in the comments. But I'm excited to referee this and just see. I'm interested to see how Felizi navigates it, because I just don't. Yeah, it'd be interesting because I've
not even worried at all, Jeff. Not even worried.
Look a little bit worried, but yeah. Hey, let's get into it anyway. So what's your quote of the week? Quote of the week, Steve. What do we?
My quote of the week is. You can sway 1,000 men by appealing to their prejudices quicker than you convince one man by logic.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Profound. So hopefully I can give it a go.
Was that a boxing? I thought you said that was a boxing quote. Who did that?
It wasn't a boxing quote. You guys have the boxing quotes coming up.
Yeah.
What made you pull that one up, Steve?
I Googled debating quotes. And that was the first one that came up 10 minutes ago.
There you go. He's prepped. He's ready. He's ready to run.
What about you, Jeff? What's yours, mate?
Insults for Joe.
You spent too long looking at insults. I've got no insults. I
came up with Joe Tucker, the toe sucker. And that's just, I couldn't think of anything that rhymes with Tucker.
Oh.
Yeah, PG. That's PG worthy.
No, Joe's not even your real name, is it?
Here we go.
None of it.
You got to stop smiling, boys. There's too much friendliness here. Like there's insults, but I don't know if you're too friendly. So if anybody's got any comments or questions, I want to see those, and I want to see if anybody's not sure. We'll address those questions. My quote is a boxing one, because I try and marry it up. So I think Tyson was an interesting character, but everybody loves this quote. Or everybody quotes this quote. Maybe they're loving it, but everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. So it's a bit brutal. It's a bit graphic. And anybody who sort of followed Tyson with Evander Holyfield, is he the one? There was a bit of mouth action with. That sounded funny. Jeez, that's an interesting way of putting it. Let's just say there was he decided he got hungry and wanted to take a bite mid-fight. So yeah, I think that was funny.
Yeah. Well, that's actually a good point. I was talking to Steve about property planning the other day, and one of the things is when you're planning out your portfolio, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face, right? You
interest rates
have paper plans, right? Exactly. There's all these other factors that come into play, and if you plan to get a 5% growth and a 4% yield, and you get a 6% growth and a 3% yield, what does that actually mean? You have to keep rejigging your plan and your portfolio based on what you've currently got and what you're going to get. And then after you've got that one, rejig it all over again, because it's going to change, because your plans always change.
Your lifestyle changes as well, Joe. Like 8 years ago, I thought I was going to be an engineer for 20 years. Then I became a buyer's agent. Then I wrote a book. Then I've got my own company now. And just as you know as well, owning your own company, very hard to borrow in the first couple of years. So your plan gets pushed back 2 years. And so it all changes and chops and change. But having live documents obviously helps.
Yeah. What about you, Joe? What's your quote of the week, man? You got a boxing.
My one's from Rocky Balboa, the king of boxing. Everyone knows Rocky Balboa. Remember, the mind is your best muscle. Big arms can move rocks, but big words can move mountains. That's what we hope for tonight. That is what we're trying to do. The financial freedom mountain is what everyone's trying to go up, and hopefully with residential and commercial property, we can, I don't know, move the mountain somehow. I don't know.
I thought you were going to go a different quote there, Joe, because one that he's more famous for, which, Adrian,
what's that one?
Adrian. He doesn't say anything else. I don't understand anything else Salome was saying, so that the whole movie. He's just like me after one or two beers. No idea what's going on. So, yeah, that was a good one, Joe, and I just ruined it. But yeah, so let's done the quote a week, and I'm excited to get into this, but we've got something a little bit special from Lee as well. He's going to talk about one of his latest purchases. So, but if you're excited, but we probably should, we'll save that for after the break, Joe.
Let's do it.
Hope you guys are ready. I'm pumped.
Selling a property. It isn't something we do every single day. There's actually more involved in the process than you may initially think. Like, how do you find the best agent? How do you ensure that you're going to pay the lowest fees? It's not easy, and then also throw in all the stress and pressure of selling. And that's why Scott Agate, a former real estate agent and expert property negotiator from Hello House, has created his leading agent finder service. After a 20-year career managing agents himself, Scott has personally conducted over 3,000 property transactions, along with running 3 Bell franchises. He knows all these agent tricks. Scott has created an in-depth 5-step process for his leading agent finder service. First, he establishes the true market value for your property, uses a triangulation method to shortlist the leading agents, creates a competitive environment for those agents to send through their best proposals, vets those proposals, and then he negotiates the best agent fees for you. This ensures that you're not only getting the best rate for selling, but most importantly, you have a leading agent on your side selling your property to maximize the end sale value. Oh, and did I mention this service is completely free? If you'd like to know exactly how Scott runs his 5-step leading agent finder service, he's detailed it with the link below. Or if you'd like to speak with Scott to help find you the leading agent in your area, book a call today. Hello.
I've lost you, Jeff. You're on mute.
Yeah, you're on mute, mate.
Yeah, there you go. I was just saying something completely profound, and that's the joys of live TV. So yes, people selling, it's an interesting concept. I even saw somebody the other day in the group calling it the dirty word, the selling. I thought they were talking about another S word, and I was like, oh, geez, so selling. But before we get into this session, I'm going to introduce these two guys because if you don't know them, you've probably been living under a rock. But let's say, so Polizzi, he's a mathematical, he's an engineer, and he's purchased over 1,000. Actually, you know what? I'm just thinking I'm doing it too early now. We're gonna go to Steve's story because I need to do the whole. Yeah, I didn't think that through. So first of all, before we get into these guys, so tell us, Steve, about you. We starting off with people's latest or first purchase. So we've already talked about your first, but what about your most recent? Because people love. Tell us about that and what was involved.
Okay. So as we were talking about before, I've just bought a 2-bedroom apartment in the UK. So it's just about an hour south of London. It's like a beachside town. Actually, I'll show a photo. That's probably the easiest way.
Where is it? Brighton?
Brighton. So it's actually called Hove, which is the suburb next to it. But just let me know when you can see the screen.
Can see it.
Yeah.
Oh, we've got the matrix.
Just one of these. So seaside town. The thing is, so the point we were talking about before is in Australia, I wouldn't touch like an apartment just because you've got the chance of oversupply. But here, like these buildings are 350 years old. So because of the heritage listing, you actually can't have an oversupply. And the numbers are quite attractive as well. So one of the key differences I wanted to bring up was actually the tenants actually pay your council rates and water rates. So completely different in Australia. But basically, they're cash flow positive. I bought that one for about $1 million Aussie, and it rents for about $1,200 a week, Australian dollars as well. So that without the council rates and water rates, it's not a bad little passive income. And I'll probably turn it into like an Airbnb or something like that. But just just bit of a different mindset here as well. People are okay with living in apartments. It's not like we have the same worry about oversupply and things like that because everything's so old and existing.
Is that because there's more people in the UK, or what's the reason why they're?
It's just this culture. They're just been that way for long term. It's easy to keep bigger buildings warm as opposed to having standalone houses. It's the same as how most of the houses are terraces as well. They're not freestanding, and it's just to keep the warmth in during winter. But it's just they've got a huge housing supply shortage here. Like there's 200,000 people shortage at the moment.
Wow. And also they're really keen on protecting the historic heritage buildings as well. Like they're on point. They won't touch them.
That's also one of the negatives. So things like changing the windows, you don't just go change the window yourself. You have to go get council permission. It's got to be as per the previous way. So there are some extra costs there you need to worry about. Also some extra stamp duties. If you're an investor here, you pay almost twice the amount of stamp duty. So a big chunk of cash up front. But yeah, just for diversification for the portfolio, my fiance is from the UK, so we bought under her name. So just diversify the portfolio and have a little Europe pad we can come to.
And what's the growth rate? Like, what does growth look like over there? Is it?
It's basically on par with Australia. They've had a huge 3 years. So if I bought this property 3 years ago, I probably would have got it for £400,000. And then I bought it for £500,000. So 200 grand up in a couple of years. So I missed the boat a little bit there, but it's I'm a long-term investor, as you know, Joe. Like I'm buying it for the next 20, 30 years. I'm not worried about making a little cash cow. One of the other benefits is the brokers are probably going to kill me here. It's not going to affect my serviceability in Australia if I don't declare it. And I'm not saying I'm not to declare it, but they don't check. Yours. They don't check. Yeah, my fiance still got it. So theoretically, but there are some little advantages there where it won't affect your serviceability when we go to.
You really shouldn't be talking about it in our small group of 20 people.
I just said I'm not going to do it, Jeff. I said I wouldn't do it.
That's what he said. I heard him. Okay, I'm ready for this Royal Rumble.
Royal Rumble. Hey, that's a different kind of thing. I mean, but I used to. I love watching. Anyway, I'm getting a bit technical, pedantic. So I'm going to introduce you two guys because otherwise you're not going to introduce yourself. So we should have had some theme music. I should have got you to pick some, but that sounds like it would have been a bit organized. So in the blue corner we have the commercial connoisseur, the mechanical engineer. Structural design. Sorry, you're chartered mechanic. There you go. You've purchased over 1,000 properties for your clients in every major capital city and regional centre in Australia. And you put on your website, you're a leading property educator, constant stream videos, blogs, and free resources. So So as he comes into the ring and he has probably the best beard in property in Australia, I would say. I don't know about the world because that's Bigger Pockets bloke, Brandon Turner. I think he's got a better. I don't know. Maybe you'd be on par. The best beards in the world. But,
thanks, mate.
So welcome to the stage. And we have the residential regent or regal, whatever it is. This is better. And we've got Joe Tucker. So he was the head of sales at one of Australia's leading was it a prop tech or legal tech? What was it?
Largest legal technology company in Australia.
There you go. Yeah. And now you're running one of Australia's up and coming and probably fastest growing from a client perspective, not so much. The buyers agency, so property principals, and you're nominated for that. Was it the Small Business Awards?
Australian Small Business Champion Awards 2022. Yeah. So you don't have to vote. So I would get everyone to jump on a vote to try and pump up my numbers, but it doesn't work that way. So actually, send them an email and try and see if you can vote me up and get me to win the award. But very, very honoured to get that one.
Joe, that's freaking awesome, man. Like in your first year getting that, well done.
Thanks, man.
And also a multi-million-dollar property portfolio as well. So, and we spoke about that last week. So, yeah, it's excited to. I think there's Khaleesi's got a slight height advantage, a slight experience advantage, but I'm sure that Joe can overcome that here. So, no. He's even got a glove. What's Joe got? Joe, he's looking around.
He's bare knuckle boxing.
Yes, exactly. I'm old school. I bite people's ears off.
Jeez, okay, it's awesome. So look, I want to clean and fair, but I want some contention. I don't want to see you guys. You're smiling again too much. So I want to. Without further ado, let's get into the first point.
What are we doing today? So what is the actual overall framework of what we're going to be covering off today?
So the framework. So we've got five question statements that we're going to discuss and debate. And the reason I think rather than giving a person 5 minutes to talk about a topic or a concept, I think it's better if we can have a bit of back and forward and sort of then decide or make a decision and just kind of have a discussion. So we're going to talk about things like capital growth, cash flow, leverage, risk, and I think the due diligence is the last one. I should know these topics, but they're the five key things we're going to talk about, and they're the things a lot of people consider. That's the framework when people
buy sort of commercial and resi, and they're the things you talk about at the barbecue with Uncle Bob or Auntie Mary. And so I think that's sort of a nice jumping off point. So does that sort of cover it, Joe?
Yeah, that covers it. And what's going to happen is we're going to be chatting. So throw your questions out there as well, because we'll get to the questions at the end, because I'm planning to go pretty deep with this. So there's going to be a lot of questions. So we'll try and get to them at the end as well. So keep popping them in as we go along.
Yeah,
I think it'll be fun as well if people think someone wins one of the rounds, just put it in the
comments.
Oh,
that's a great idea. Yes. Who wins that round?
Who are you backing in the audience? Are you backing Joe in resi, or are you backing Khaleesi in commercial, or like who's going to be the ultimate winner tonight? I think I'd have a sneaky 20 on Khaleesi, but Joe might. Yeah.
Not a chance. Resi crushes.
Oh, okay.
Let's load up the first question.
Commercial doesn't grow. I mean, whereas resi has grown consistently over the past 30 years. Jeez. Okay. So who wants to? I think given we're sort of negging commercial, I think we should give Steve the first reply. What do you say about that? And what numbers do you got?
You're wrong. I win.
Wrong, but why are we wrong though?
Right. So there's a couple reasons why this myth comes about. The first one is things like high density office spaces. So people will say, oh, they don't grow the same as a house. Of course they don't. A house does not grow the same as a high density apartment, for instance, because one's got a land component, one doesn't. One's got an oversupply, one doesn't. So that's where some of the myth comes from. The other part of the myth comes from generally commercial cycles are offset to residential cycles. So when we have 5 or 7 years of really good capital growth in the residential market, and commercial sits there for 5 or 6 years not doing too much, the residential people will then say, look, commercial doesn't grow, see? But they're not looking over the 30-year period. They're just looking in a short time frame. One of the reasons why commercial takes a little bit longer is you don't realize the value until the leases finish. So if you've got lots of leases on 3, 4, 5 years lease, you're not going back and refinancing that property or valuing that property. So you get that delay there. Funnily enough, in the last 5 years, we've had about the same capital growth anyway. So that's a complete myth. The other point I want to note is different commercials are going to grow at different rates. So with residential, very easy to compare apples and apples, a 3-bedroom house and a 4-bedroom house. You can't do that with commercial. 150 square meter warehouse is different to a 500 square meter warehouse, which is different to a 10,000 square meter warehouse. Same as a suburban retail strip is different to an office space. They're all going to grow different rates. So the ones with less land component and less supply and demand are going to have less capital growth. Of course they are. The same as how a residential property in a mining town might not have the same as a blue chip property. So the different types of commercials, you're going to have different growth rates. But the point I want to finish on is you actually do have to have the same capital growth as residential. And the reason for that is if you don't, you'd end up with a huge disparity in price. And there's not. They always have to remain par. You're not going to have $1 million house that sits there for 5 or 10 years and then goes to $2 million, and the $500,000 warehouse that's right next door to that $1 million house stay there at $500,000, because all the people living in a $2 million house are they're going to look at this $500,000 warehouse and go, why am I buying a $2 million house that rents for $800 a week when I can get 3 times more rent by buying this commercial property? Then the commercial property cycle starts and they all shift their money into that. So that there always has to be a price comparable. Otherwise, over 30 years, you'll end up with $5 million houses and $1 million warehouses. And it's not the case. They have to remain.
Some examples on that, though. Have you got,
I can show you. We can go through and go look at any commercial warehouse, for instance, because warehouses I like because they have a significant land component. And tell me if you can find one that 10 years ago is not doubled in price.
And actually, that's a quick, if somebody were to want to look at it, what's the best platform to actually look at that? Because I wouldn't even know where to start to look at commercial, kind of what it's sold for. Is it real commercial? Or?
No, core logic, same as residential. It's got all the historical data of every property that's got a title will be on there. Yep. So this basically goes through the past. You obviously got to try to compare apples and apples, like ones that are leased and not leased and things like that. But almost every property in a blue chip area I've looked at has doubled in the last 10 years. So there it is. Tough titties, Joe. I win.
What do you got to say to that, Joe? What do you got to say? I don't know.
Well, I mean, the statement commercial doesn't grow, whereas residential is growing. That's a true fact. Sorry, it's not a fact. Commercial does grow. Just looking at the numbers, but I am much more pro residential for the solid growth perspective. Actually, this is a chart that you shared, Steve. Said that very aggressively, didn't I? Let me just share my. Joe's
on a back foot a bit there. Like, geez, he's sort of
no. So we're talking about growth. We've had consistent capital growth in the property market. Let's just drop this banner down. With periods. Oh,
sorry, Joe. My bad.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so this is a chart of capital growth over since 1980. All the way up to 2022. And this is when people get worried about capital growth and flow times and those type of things. No one is buying a property, and you're not buying a residential and you're not buying a commercial for a slow period of time. You're not buying it for the next 1 to 2 years. You're buying it for the long haul. So this says from 1980 to 1992, we had an 11% growth per annum. So here's 8 years of actual zero growth for Canberra. But this chart really does indicate exactly, why, maybe you should consider diversifying. Like, look at what Steve's done. He's bought properties in multiple states in different locations. But I like what you put up here, Steve. So it's good. But one thing is, Steve, so you're telling me that commercial, let's just bring our little faces back. Commercial grew 22% in 2001. In the Sunshine Coast, it grew 33.7% over the past 12 months. Capital growth far exceeds that in commercial or residential. Far more.
Didn't you just say it grew 33% in 1 year? Isn't that a good thing?
Yeah, that's a good thing. In residential space, but not in the commercial space. How do you get that much growth so quickly?
It's just FOMO. It's the same as why, at the start of COVID, Sydney people said, there's no way it's going to grow. And we've seen 20% growth in a couple of years, which is actually one point I want to talk about. And this is probably going to support you more than it is me, Joe. People don't compare apples and apples. We look at these stats and go, look at Sydney had 10% growth for 5 years, year on year, here and there. And a lot of the, especially, I'm going to badmouth some buyers agents, some of the older buyers agents that have that old mentality of, you have to buy inner ring Sydney. That's where you get the best capital growth long term. That's historically where you've had the best growth. But in 1970, the population of Sydney was 2.2 million. Now the population of Western Sydney is 2 million. So why aren't those same buyers agents and investors saying buy inner ring Parramatta? It's actually the same size as Sydney was. So why aren't they shifting their mindset? They're not comparing like for like. So then they obviously got the affordability point of view on things like that. But this is why we've got a whole debate with capital growth, because you can just pick and choose date periods in different capital cities, different locations, different proximities to CBDs, and it's going to be different. We're looking over 30, 40 years. I grew up in Western Sydney and it was farmland when I grew up. Now the Hills district is just houses as far as I can see. So it's not always like for like.
I was going to say, please, did you grow up in the 1930s or 1940s?
Places like Kellyville and Bella Vista and areas like that.
I know.
They were farms.
Yeah, they were. There's still some sort of farmland expanding out that way, and the Riverstone and the Box Hill. I mean, they're the probably recent
Box Hill
ones.
in the last 10 years has filled in as well. I actually owned a duplex in Box Hill, and I sold that, and then that was greenfield, and then now there's no more greenfield there.
Yeah. So Joe, what do you sort of say about what Polizzi just? I feel like Polizzi just supported you. Come on, why we? I wouldn't be presenting points to the other side.
We all know both me and Joe like commercial and resi for its own merits, so it's fine.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. Exactly. This is where it's going to kind of end up. Is that I really like residential. I really like commercial. Steve really likes residential, and Steve really likes commercial. But one thing that I think we have on the residential side of things is commercial wouldn't exist without residential. It's impossible for someone to start out in property and go straight into commercial and build up a large enough portfolio to be able to support their in a commercial purchase. They just can't do it unless you come from serious money. So my whole point of this is yours wouldn't exist without ours. So ours is the foundation and what sets everything up. property investing in residential is where you grow your wealth. It's where you build up capital to then transition eventually into commercial. But if you didn't grow that wealth, there would be no way to get into the commercial space. So that's my little.
Is that a low blow, Joe? You sort of you agree, and then he went in with the uppercut. Like, what are your thoughts on that, Felicia? I mean, I don't know. Like,
let's look at it from a physical point of view. You guys wouldn't have your little houses there if it wasn't for warehouses and fabricators and manufacturers, which is commercial properties. So you need me more than I need you.
What came first, the stick hut or the manufacturer of stick huts? Like, we can all make a stick hut.
But I think, Joe.
Okay, actually, hang on. I've got
There you go.
I've got another low blow, Steve. What was your first purchase? Like, what was it?
It was a house, Joe.
Okay.
Okay.
What was your when did you buy your first commercial purchase?
About number 7, Joe.
So I guess, would you have been able to buy that commercial purchase without the 6 before residentials?
No, but we're going to get into one of the topics later. I'm going to shut this down like nothing else.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Because the interesting thing I would sort of say is that you could have rebutted there with Polizzi is, and I want to sort of level up a little bit, because you could have said that, of course, if you're buying a $1 million or $2 million commercial, then you're going to need $300,000 or $400,000 plus of equity or cash. Whereas you can, and some people dispute the buying a $400K commercial, because you still, even to buy a $400K resi, you still would need a deposit of, let's just say, roughly 60 to 70 to 80,000. So commercial, you probably need.
Yeah.
Go.
I am holding back a bit because I know we're talking about one is deposits and how hard it gets to get into it, and then one's cash flow, and then one's serviceability, which is going to be the counter arguments.
Yeah. Yeah, don't you worry. We've got our special uppercuts and special moves lined up.
Okay. All right. Well,
so who won that round? Yeah, who won that round? Throw that in the comments.
I should have got a little.
What do you mean? You wouldn't exist without us, Steve. You wouldn't exist without us.
Yeah, probably on an island in the Bahamas instead.
Yeah, there's no commercial properties there. Nothing but houses.
As the referee for this, I think in this round, I'm going to say a marginal points victory to Joe. Only just marginally, because I think he did have. I don't know that he articulated his points as well as he could have. I think he did okay, but so I don't want to sort of completely say Joe.
Look,
because
a round's a round, okay? I've won it. That's enough, Jeff.
So one to Joe, 0.
I'll give Joe that it's a lot steadier to have growth in residential markets than it is commercial, because commercial, there are so many stats. Like if you buy a retail versus an industrial versus an office, there's a lot more kind of cloud in judgment. Whereas like a house, you can go, look, there's a 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom house. Let's look at the stats over time and then make an informed decision that way. Commercial, it's actually a lot harder to get any types of stats. Like, the data is very tough. Well, there's not even such thing as you can't even look at like a medium house price, because what does a medium warehouse price mean? Like, how does that help anyone? So there's a lot more data you can use to back up your argument in residential, even though I know that the types of commercial properties that we're going to buy and we can afford, you will get the same capital growth long term. Like it's just going to be different cycles, different types, and you can burn yourself a little bit more in commercial if you don't know what you're doing, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah,
there we go.
Yeah.
Okay,
sure.
I think the audience is
get to the risk side of things. You want the next one?
Somebody says Resi. So let's see. Yeah, yes. Resi seems to be in the lead. Okay. Yep. So
how are you going to win? How are you going to win this one, Joe?
What do you mean? I'm already winning.
Well, yeah. But okay. So this is the other kind of not myth, but this is the other debate. Everybody says people are buying commercial. It's like, oh, you buy commercial for cash flow. So I had to throw in this one, of course, because otherwise it would be absolutely dominated by Resi along the way. So I'm going to let Joe go first. He's going to be pushing uphill to try and argue this one. But what are your arguments, Joe?
So this is a bit of an interesting one, right? I neither agree nor disagree. I am going on a fence position because residential cash flows are far more consistent, right? with a commercial cash flow, when you factor in vacancy rates over a 5 or 10 year period, what is the real number over that period of time? If you have a 6 months, 12 months, 24-month vacancy, that's costing you money every single time. And then over that 10-year period, that amount is not a 5%, 5%, 5%. It's then a 5%, 5%, 0%, 0%, and then it looks like that. So there are high yielding unit blocks that you can get. I was looking at a 6-pack unit block that was yielding a 9% yield. There's also more flexibility in that type of asset too, because you can sell some of those units. You can sell unit 1, sell unit 2, sell unit 3. So I wouldn't say it's far inferior. I would say it's a different type of cash flow, but there's a little bit more liquidity there as well. You know, selling a commercial property takes several months. And if you need to sell that property, you need to sell the property. And if you can't sit it on the market for 7 months while you're trying to get rid of it, and if you lose a tenant and then you need to sell, it becomes very, very difficult. And on the rental side of things, like protection wise, rent arrears with commercial, now maybe correct me if I'm wrong here, Steve, they're not insurable. There's no landlord insurance for commercial.
There is, but it's very, very expensive and not many people do it. So I'll give you that one. Yeah. Which I found incredibly interesting. One point to note on that is because you have a lease, you have different types of guarantees though. So you don't have landlord insurance. You'll actually have like a bank guarantee and the bond and a personal guarantee. So they're your insurance methods instead.
But the problem with that is you have to enforce those. And working in the legal industry, I know how difficult it is to enforce those things. Previously working in the legal industry, how difficult it is to enforce those and how much you actually get back after that. Whereas one of the things I'm sure, just to take away one of the arrows out of the quiver, is how difficult it is for, tenancies, how we constantly churn through tenancies. And if we have a bad tenant, try kicking out, like if you think you have a bad tenant in residential, try kicking out a bad tenant in a commercial space, because your bottom line, if you have a terrible person who's 45 days late and constantly really annoying, you can't just bin him, because his value is tied in with the commercial property. With the residential,
I completely disagree on that one. So it's actually much harder to kick out a residential tenant because it's a roof over their head, their families. Commercial, you own the property. If they don't abide to the contract,
change the locks.
You can literally turn up, change the locks, and then they can't get in the building. So you can actually be a lot more aggressive with commercial, whereas residential, it can take you 6 months. You have to go to tribunal, kick people out and things like that. And you mentioned like insurance. I've heard a lot of horror stories about people that have their properties damaged by the tenants, and the insurance companies don't pay out. So there's that aspect that you've got to be careful of as well when you're investing.
Yeah. Well, one of the things is I do agree that kicking out a residential tenant is a bigger process. If they don't pay, you have to give a note, you have to give enforcement. There's a legal process to follow, but you have your insurance to support them, and you can get your losses back if it happens. So that's what I agree with that. But like I said, with commercial, you can have like guarantees. You can have a 6-month bond if you want. A personal guarantee is basically like the person putting up collateral, like their house or something like that. And it will be a legal process that you'll pay 5-10 grand for, but you generally will win if they're not following the lease. But no matter what you're buying, try not to get into a legal battle. It is never fun. I've had to do it before. Don't get into legal battles. They're never good times.
What would you say about Joe's claim that I'm sure it is possible to get that to get higher cash flow unit blocks. What would your rebuttal be to that, Polizzi?
So that's one of the things with Joe. Joe was mentioning with commercial, like the vacancy periods and taking that into account. Actually, I think that's one of the other topics we're talking about. Actually, I won't say that. I'll change topic for that. For the rebuttal on that, maintenance on those is huge. So buying like a warehouse that's 3 concrete tilt-up panels and roller door, no big maintenance. I've bought many like apartment blocks for clients and unit blocks for clients. Maintenance bills is the biggest kind of degrading thing of yield. So it looks great at 9%. I bet you if you actually work out after all your expenses on maintenance, Joe, on that 9%, it's probably going to drop down to a 6% gross yield, which is still really, really strong yield, but you will be paying and think you're going to have multiple kitchens, bathrooms, toilets, maintenance issues and things like that. And that's one of the negatives of residential over commercial is paying for those actual outgoings.
And I think that pays to something, some terminology that's thrown around, the gross versus the net yields, which, are you saving that point for later on, or is that something that?
Yeah, we'll save that. Do you want me to? I'll show some cash flow spreadsheets if you want. We can actually.
Literally, I just was going to do the exact thing, the exact same thing on that unit block that I was talking about.
Okay. Well, who gets? I think Police. Since Police talking, we'll get him to show it first.
Well, I'll show him because this will support his. This will support his figure as well, because this is what I see a lot of people doing is I want a 7% yield, I want a 6% yield, I want a 8% yield, I want a 9% yield, but that yield doesn't matter. What matters is the net yield of cash that you're getting back in your pocket. So just go to this one. So this is the quick cash flow analysis. We all have the Deal Crunch calculator. We all love the Deal Crunch calculator. Everyone gets it. So $800,000 purchase. We're putting 20% down, which is $640,000. And the rent down here is $1,300 a week, which is $72,000. That is let's just scroll up, 9% gross yield. Holy crap, that is amazing. Now we have to factor in very expensive council rates for this region, property management, repairs and maintenance. So after a while, it's like, wow, these expenses are really eating into us. What is happening here? So we've got a $28,000 positive cash flow, but the net yield is only 3.56%. So yes, this is vanity, right? 9% gross yield is vanity. Gross yield is vanity. Net yield is sanity. This is what's putting money back into your pocket. So always make sure that you do a net yield calculation. Now, if this is a negative number, it will be a negative number here, right? Because it's money over the purchase price. So this is where commercial is going to kick our butts in the next 5 seconds, I imagine. Load them up, Steve. Load them up.
One of the points I want to point out that a lot of people won't know is if you're buying an apartment block that's over 3 apartments with some lenders, it's considered a commercial loan. Same as some lenders are over 4 unit blocks. It's commercial. So just be wary of that when we're talking like, residential is good because you can get away with 10% deposit. You can't. It's a commercial loan over 4 units in the block. So just be mindful of that when you're doing your numbers.
Very good point. Very, very good point.
Let's have a look, Ski. All right.
So Joe, while Steve's getting up, are there ways you can reduce those expenses in your sort of in your unit block, or that's as optimized as you'll get?
Yeah, I mean, you can do different types of management. There's also like government schemes that are out where you can get government housing type tenants in the place, and then they will secure your rent at maybe at the market rent or a little bit higher. So there is ways to affect that, and then they do maintenance repairs for damages that the tenant does. So there's little things like that allow you to optimize that rent. So
what are we looking at here, Steve?
Do you want to press Command plus on this one just to zoom in a little bit more?
Oh yeah. All right. So this is just a very simple. I'm going to show a simple residential one as well. Like it's just high level. Don't grill me over the little bits and pieces. It's just to kind of demonstrate.
What about land tax?
Let's just say we buy $1 million purchase on a 5.5% net yield, which is a pretty typical yield at the moment. So that's $55,000 a year. Depreciation, you'll generally get a little bit more on a commercial than you will residential, just because there's a bit more to claim. And then I've just allowed for about 4% kind of rental management. No outgoings because the tenant pays it. So Joe will argue, yep, when you don't have a tenant, you've got to pay that. And you do have to take that into account when you're looking at your ROI. But just so you get an idea, like when rates were kind of 2.5% a year ago, you got $40,000 a year cash flow. Like that is bloody unreal. And then the topic of the month is what happens when interest rates go up. Cool. Let's have a look. When interest rates go up on a 70% loan, or it's 5% or 6%, you're still positive. You're still 15 to 23 grand a year positive. And this is one of the points where Joe was saying, oh yeah, but you might have a 12 months vacancy every 5 years or 10 years, whatever. You are still up quite a lot. Like if you have a property that's 30 grand a year positive, in 10 years time, you're 300 grand up just in cash flow. So even if you have 12 months, okay, that 300 grand then becomes 270 or 260 or whatever it may be. It's still a really, really strong position. So I want to show you that. And that's how you can mitigate some of the risk with interest rate rises at the moment. So let's have a look at residential at the moment. One of the other points is, and we mentioned before about repairs. So residential, you always have to count it for repairs. You're always going to have hot water systems breaking, air conditioners breaking, replacements of kitchens, bathrooms, all that type of stuff. You'll see here I've actually put in a 1.4 mil property, and that's because I thought Joe was going to say, yeah, but you can't buy a property because you have to use a 30% deposit, whereas residential you can get away with a 20 or 10%. So I've actually bumped that up using 10%. And then we can do whatever rent you want, but I just chose $900 a week, a typical kind of house in the inner west, for instance. Little bit less depreciation. I've put some capital gains and a little bit of rental management, things like that. But just to kind of put in perspective, your cash return on something like this is you're neutral to negative. If interest rates go up to 5% on an 80% loan, you're negative 16 grand a year. So I just showed you on the other spread of the commercial, we're 20 grand a year positive, and now we're 16 grand a year negative. So it's 35 grandish difference in price. So just to remain on par with the commercial, you need 35 grand a year extra capital growth just to remain on par. So I know I'm kind of sugarcoating it here, and there are risks with commercial. So don't run away and just buy commercial because you think like, oh, I'm going to do fantastic here. There are risks, but in terms of cash flow, like we all know that's why people buy commercial. It's got really, really high cash flow, but really high risk if you don't know what you're doing.
Do you have any points to counter that, Joe? Or are you on the canvas by now? You're down for a 10 count.
Well, if we're going to talk about, well, one of the questions I've got for you, Steve, is why is commercial a better cash flow? Like why?
One of the ones is just a bit of an unknown resource that people haven't tapped into. So it's just non-investor. If every resi investor shifted their attention to commercial, prices would grow dramatically and the rents would stay the same, and then you'd get less of a yield. So that's one reason. There's actually just less investors in the market. The other one is you need bigger deposits, which we'll talk about later on the next topic. So it's a lot harder to get into. And that's what you're alluding to before of why I had to build my residential property portfolio first to be able to just get the deposit to get into it. So that's also holding people back as well. And then the other one is just lack of knowledge. People just don't understand it. Like it's just kind of, they put it outside their realm. So you've got less people looking at, bigger deposit, more of an unknown. That's why you get the return.
Yeah. And the reason, and what is the reason why they do a 30% LVR?
So it's basically, one of them is risk mitigating. So the banks want to know that if something goes bad, they can get their money back. And you alluded to it before, a vacant commercial property actually sells typically in an investor market, that is, sells for about 20% less than a tenanted one. So the banks just want to make sure that, cool, if the tenant leaves and you can't afford the mortgage, yep, cool, we'll flog that property off and we'll get our money back. So you just got to be kind of mindful of that as well. Some people then go, oh, if it's 20% cheaper, why not just buy a vacant one, get a tenant and make 20%? You can do that. That's a tactic, but you have to pay GST on the purchase price. So it's not actually a going concern. So you've actually got, not only do you have a 30% deposit, you've got an additional 10% for GST. You will get that back though on your first BAS statement or tax return once you get a tenant, but 10% is on $1 million property. It's extra 100 grand that you need to be sitting there. And then the other one is you need to be able to maintain obviously the debt. So you can't get those benefits of getting like lease loans or using the rent to help with your serviceability. So you've got extra 10%, then you've got to be able to handle a mortgage with no tenant. So your serviceability goes out the window there. And then the maintaining the cost while you find a tenant. So you actually have to hold the property for the 6 or 12 months to get a tenant. So there are those added layers of risk. If you're good at what you're doing and you're a cash buyer, there is some money to be made there. But for 95% of people investing, stick with tenanted properties. It'll be easier for finance. It's lower risk for you. You can analyze the numbers as is and at least get through the next 3 to 4 years on a good solid lease.
There we go. So I think we've delved into about 4 or 5 different of the topics there. But on this one, I think I'd be interested to see if the audience, if anybody thinks that resi wins on cash flow being superior to commercial. But yeah, I don't know. I think this one's pretty conclusive. I think I think we're 1-1. I think we've
I
leveled
wouldn't say it
it
was
up. So.
conclusive. Conclusive is a big word.
Well, I mean, I think I could use the word knockout, but I mean, it's close to a knockout, Joe. You've been down for an 8 count. I mean, conclusive is maybe a more polite word. But I think does anybody think that commercial, that Resi does?
Residential,
Resi wins
of
that
course, won that one, of course. But anyway, look, we've got 3 rounds to go, and leverage and lending is the next one, and this is where it's going to get interesting.
It is, yeah. What do you? I think this one's sort of a little bit more even. The first 2 were. I wouldn't say Joe absolutely knocked it out of the park with the capital growth. He did definitely won, but the cash flow for Leasy probably had a massive advantage of that one. So, but this one is an interesting one because I think there's a part that. So I'm trying to think who I should let go first here. Let's let Steve go with this one because I think he'll come up with some interesting points that Joe may floor Joe. So, what are your thoughts on? Is much easier to borrow more and higher LVRs in Resi than commercial?
All right, so I'm going to M&M him here in 8 Mile and tell him basically what he knows already. So getting started, Joe's right. Residential, you can get away with 90% deposits. So if you've got the choice of going out and buying 3 residential properties on 90% loans versus 1 commercial on a 70%, and you're starting out your portfolio, that is a rock solid option because you're going to have 3 times the property portfolio. If you get the same capital growth, even though I won the first round theoretically, and you get the same capital growth, you will make 3 times much in capital growth from the Resi portfolio. So that's Joe will win on that one. I agree 100%. And that is one of the biggest negatives with commercial is the bigger deposits. Where commercial really comes into play though, is once you actually start growing a bigger portfolio, banks don't give you 90% loans anymore. Most of the time they won't even give you 80% loans. You actually have to start reducing your LVR as your portfolio gets larger into the multi-millions. And that normally comes down to serviceability because they can't handle loan. Like we know banks do their shading. They add their 1.5, 1.75% interest rates. They do all your loans to principal plus interest. Then they do their shading of like 20% vacancy on the property. So as I showed you that residential one before, being negative 15 grand a year and then applying that criteria on top, they're just going to say, no, we're not lending to you anymore. Whereas the commercial property where I showed you, even with those higher interest rates, it still looks good in the bank's eyes. So you can keep progressing your portfolio there that way. As I've mentioned on some of the other lives, you've got things like lease stock loans where the banks will give you a loan based on the strength of the actual lease. So commercial enables you to keep growing your portfolio. I'm not going to say infinitely, but basically throughout your kind of life. And the best thing to do is actually get a balance. So if you want to keep kind of maximizing leveraging, use the high cash flow ones. Use that apartment block that Joe kind of showed you or commercial to keep your serviceability high enough that you can keep buying. But then bring it back to what your goals are. So assess your goals. What are you actually trying to achieve over what time frame and what your risk profile is? So like an example for that is if Joe was 63 years old and he came to me and said, oh, look, Steve, I want to retire in 2 years' time. Cool. What's the point of buying a 90% loan residential property that's neutral or negatively geared? That doesn't help him. Commercial's perfect for him because he's got a bit of capital saved or he's got some properties paid off already. Commercial's perfect. If Joe comes to me and he's 18 years old and he's just starting out and he's got $50,000, we're not talking commercial. Like that's not enough to get in with a 30% deposit. Go residential, build that wealth base, and then shift into commercial after that. So I'm pretty sure Joe is going to agree with me on this, which means he's going to win the first half of the argument. I'll win the second half, but we'll see what he says.
Well, before we even get to Joe, one thing you kept saying 70%. Like my understanding is that commercial, you can actually get you can now get sort of up to 80%, depending on the asset, of course, and the lease and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, there are 2 or 3 lenders doing 80% and quite competitive rates as well. But I was trying to be devil's advocate against myself, just to really compare kind of apples and oranges.
Mate, none of this devil's advocate. You've got to if you want to win, you got to get some fierceness in.
Long term. Like I've seen enough portfolios and large portfolios now that I'm yet to see anyone with a huge multi-million-dollar portfolio that's at an 80% LVR. Like even residential portfolios. As you get your bigger portfolio, you become more risk to the banks. You have to start reducing. And that's why you see all those young gurus with $5-10 million portfolios. None of them have a 90% LVR. They've all got 50 to 65-ish% LVRs. And you need that, especially in residential, just to keep going. Commercial, yeah, you've got some excuse, but there's not many investors that just own 10 commercials and no residentials, because you have to dip your toe in somewhere at some point.
Yeah. Okay. What are your thoughts, Joe? What are your points on this one?
Yeah, on this one, well, it's just a fact. Is it easy to borrow more at higher LVRs in residential? Yes, absolutely. But we've got to look at exactly like what Steve was saying there. We need to look at our overall goals. Like, this is what I always say, and Jeff, it's from one of our mentors. What are we trying to do in property? We're trying to make the most amount of money in the quickest amount of time with the least amount of risk and the least amount of frustration as well. And hands down, of those 4 factors, residential wins every single time, because you can control an asset for $0 down. I bought a property for nothing. Like, I didn't put any money into it. I used a guarantor loan to be able to go ahead and buy that property. I then renovated that property and then released the guarantor loan. So I have literally unlimited potential because I didn't put $1 into it. So from a leveraging,
a guarantor loan or like a parental guarantee?
Parental guarantee. Yeah. So,
and just for that, I'm going to butt in there a little bit and just say, for anybody considering that of course you have to be very responsible when you're doing that. I just want to make sure public service announcements, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I used it for a renovation project, because I needed to get the bank LVR to up to 80%. So I purchased the property at 105% LVR. So I could borrow more money than the property was worth. That's the beauty of residential. And then I renovated it and dropped the and then increased the value beyond what the then increased it to 88% value, and then refinanced and released the guarantor within 3 months. So you can do those type of things in residential. So yeah.
Counteract that, Joe. You can do those things in commercial as well. You won't get a typical like parental guarantee loan, but like theoretically, there's no net result difference if a parent pulls out equity from their property and gives it to you cash as a gift to pay for your deposit. It's the same net result. It's just a slightly different way of doing it. And then, of course, you can still do the value adds for commercial. You can still try to fabricate an extra 20% equity or 30% equity in the property, go back to the banks, refinance, do that. A lot more complicated, and there's a lot more kind of different methods to do it. Residential, I agree, it's a bit easier. Everyone knows the standard, renovate, duplex development, subdivision, things like that. And there's a lot more information out there to make sure you don't stuff it, because you can read up on it a lot more and just make sure you cross the T's and dot the I's.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in terms of that as well, like to renovate a house, we're pretty good at it. Like, we know what we're doing. You get the thing, you don't spend too much money on the thing. But to renovate and add value to a commercial property, you need to be a lot more sophisticated. It's not the first thing that you go ahead and sign up and say, hey, I'm going to install this X-ray machine because it's $100,000 or $200,000, but it's going to bring in and attract this tenant, which is then going to raise the rent. So I definitely feel like for the everyday Aussie, that's kind of the easier way in, to start in that residential space, build up that base. What we see, and Steve, you see this as well, I imagine, is our clients start out building out an asset base, and they build up hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars of net, and then they go into commercial because they're like, I want to capitalize on that. But now they're getting all this cash flow and they're like, oh crap, now I've got to pay tax. I'm 45, 50 years old. I don't want to be paying tax on that. And then they funnel that tax back into high risk residential developments where they do joint ventures and they do these things. And they go kind of full circle. So not everyone. I do see a lot of people just going into commercial and just ending at commercial. But with that capital, you've got to pay tax on it. And if you're too young.
Yeah, but as we've always discussed in this group, don't not buy a property because you're paying tax. It means you're doing very well. I'd rather pay tax on positive cash flow than get tax back and lose money. So just like that. But like you said, it comes down to your risk profile and what you're trying to achieve. Like, a lot of my clients are actually business owners where, no offense to the accountants, and they're not paying tax that they should be. They're cash flow rich, but on paper, they're not earning income. So they actually don't have the serviceability to be able to buy lots of residential properties. One way to get around that, because commercial is really good serviceability, is they actually can have their low income, but they do have to put that bigger deposit in, and they can buy commercials. And that's a lot of my clients, just business owners that really, really profitable businesses, but on paper, not so much income for the serviceability side of things.
Ooh, there you go, Joe. There's some. I don't know. This is an interesting one because I actually don't know who wins this. So I might throw it over the audience. Who do you think has made the more compelling arguments?
So I'm going to throw one more
Oh.
statistic out there in terms. Well, I guess we're going to talk about risk next. Actually, I'm going to save this haymaker for the next one.
Oh, okay. Oh, geez. So you want to? Yeah, you're happy to? I don't know. Should we just say that Joe loses that round because he's?
Well, let's find
back?
out who is who's the winner of that. We'll tally up the votes. We'll go to our ad right now, and then we'll come right back to answer the other questions.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. The amazing thing with commercial property investing is that in most cases, it's cash flow positive from day one, which means that you can drive those profits towards paying down the debt. There are instances with commercial property investing where you can actually have the property pay itself off over 10 years, which is absolutely crazy. With commercial property, you get massive net yields, so you can expect anywhere between 6 to 10%. And as we've seen in the current boom, these properties not only provide large cash flow, they do certainly grow wildly in value too. Now, with big rewards comes some risk, and this is why you should de-risk your investment as much as possible. And the way you do that is with expert due diligence. And this is why we highly recommend people hire professionals to help you along in your investing journey. Steve Polisi of Polisi Property is one such expert. Being a chartered mechanical and structural engineer in a past life, Steve draws on his analytical and mathematical skills to do that expert due diligence for you. With 6 years experience in the space, Steve has over 1,200 property transactions under his belt. He's the guy you want in your corner, crunching the numbers and finding the best properties in the best locations, along with ensuring that you avoid the mistakes. Steve has actually even written the book on commercial property investing in Australia. And not only is it a bestseller, I believe it to be the most comprehensive in commercial property investing on the market today. He's been generous enough to give us a massive discount for our audience of 50%. So use the code OZPROP, click the link below, get a copy today, and start learning and getting on your commercial property investing journey.
Yeah, see, I'm looking at the comments now, and Hayden's chirped in and said a very timely ad, that one. So,
yeah, but it's funny that it's just me banging on how great commercial is.
But Brian said Joe wins that one apparently. Yeah, so Brian stuck his neck out. Yeah, stuck his neck out. And does anybody else want to chip in before whilst we're getting the next?
I think that's a unanimous. That's a unanimous vote. That one.
Why am I in a residential property forum? I'm never going to win this.
Exactly. Where's Andrew Bean when you need him? Oh, okay. What's the next one?
I don't know. I've still got to make a decision. Well, let's while we're sort of, I'll put that as a. I'm going to say it's a.
You can call them draw.
Yeah, call it. Well, no, but if we, yeah. Flip a coin.
Because otherwise, then we've got two. Yeah, okay, yeah. All right.
That's true. There are 0 points. You know, there aren't draws in boxing. So 38-38.
Yeah. Well, let's we'll talk about this one. And I
think
the
wrong one.
Is it? Okay. That's the one I had. But which one? Let's put it up, Joe.
Oh shit. Oh no, you're right.
I am right. I'm also the referee. So what this one I think is tougher for Polisi in commercial. So we'll give him the first right, and I'll contemplate and see if there's more people who want to talk about lending in commercial versus resi. But the commercial property will sit vacant for 12 to 24 months and has too much risk. So here we're talking about risk and mitigating risk. So what are your thoughts on this statement, Polisi?
Okay. All right. So first one is you need to compare apples and apples. So yes, there are terrible commercial properties that sit there vacant for a long time. Same as there's terrible residential properties, like go buy in a mining town or any of those greenfield sites that they build on the edges of Sydney and Melbourne's and things like that. You'll have 6 to 12 months vacancy there. So you need to be comparing. You can buy low risk commercial properties. So if you buy like an industrial complex and it's surrounded by residential property and that residential population is growing, that's going to be a pretty kind of low risk one. Put it in perspective, pretty much every capital city besides Darwin, vacancy for commercial industrial properties is under 1.6%. So you're talking like Sydney's 1.2, Brisbane's 1.6, like that generally means you're looking at kind of 1 to 6 months vacancy for those types of asset classes. One of the arguments I'll make though is, yes, you'll have 1 to 6 months vacancy, but that'll generally only happen every, say, 5 to 15 years. So say we get 10 years down the track and we have 6 months vacancy, that's actually not that much different to having a residential property that goes vacant for a couple of weeks every couple of years. So it's only an extra month or two in terms of length. The other counter argument I want to make to that is, I showed you the cash flow spreadsheet. So buying like $1 million property that's 30, 40 grand a year positive, in 10 years time, you're 400 grand up. So even if it sits there vacant for 12 months, cool. We dropped from 400 grand to 370 grand or 380 grand for that year, for instance. The net position is still really strong. And that's one of the mindset things you need to get over with commercial. People like a steady state cash flow with residential, and that's going to be Joe's argument. I actually agree with him. It's much more steady cash flow. If you plan for those vacancy periods and you look at it over the long run, it's not that different. It's actually lower risk because you've actually got that guaranteed cash flow, so you can mitigate it. A commercial property, even with 6 months vacancy, over that year, it's still positive. So I'm not trying to argue the point that commercial won't have longer periods of vacancy. It will, but you can buy really low risk ones. There's some areas like warehouses, for instance, on the Sunshine Coast at the moment, there's waiting lists to get into them. So you can mitigate that. It's this about doing, as the ad just said, the expert due diligence, making sure you actually check the numbers. A lot harder to check the numbers as well with commercial. Residential, we know you can go on websites like SQM and look up vacancy rates for a 3-4 bedroom house. Commercial, it is much, much harder. Like you need to go on CoreLogic and find similar properties if you can, that is, and see how long they were for lease for, how long their sales campaigns for. You need to talk to property managers in the area. You need to look at what new stocks coming on the market. It's a lot harder to get some steady state kind of numbers for it. So that's the risk there, and that's the second half of that statement. It is too much risk. You need to make sure you do the work to mitigate that risk, but you can buy very, very low risk properties. So I'd argue buying a property on a 10-year lease is much lower risk than buying a negatively geared residential property that might only go vacant every 1 or 2 years for a week or two.
I'm gonna throw a bit of a spanner in here because I think I'm gonna call that Polizzi won the last round, so it's 2-1 to commercial because the audience, just purely based on the audience, I think it would be a split. But but this one I think may make it tough for Steve to, well, not make it tough, but make it tougher for Polizzi to win. This is from Brian. So this is Brian on the resi. It looks like how much are you in conversation with Brian, Joe? But the question is, if most businesses go bust in the first 3 years, how can you ensure that you lease your commercial property to one that survives? I think I know the answer to that, but what are your thoughts on that?
No, so that's actually a really good question, and that's one of the risks. If you get a tenant who's a fresh business, 95% of businesses fail in the first 5 years. So that's part of the due diligence, is actually looking at your tenant, what their experience is, how long have they been there, have they had any other kind of commercial locations before, and then looking at that. If you're getting a tenant and they've been in that same warehouse complex for 10 years and they've just signed a 5-year lease, and you look at their financials and they've got strong financials and you've got good guarantees, you can mitigate that risk. And that's part of it as well. Like I'll actually pay less for a property that has a new tenant than I will establish one, because there's less trust in that tenant. So that's a spot on question. You need to look at that when you're buying a commercial, because it will come with more risks.
There you go.
One question I've got, Steve, is what are some of the high risk commercial properties that you kind of avoid? Because we know like off the plan apartments and house and land package for residential, but what's that for commercial?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things I want to say with that. So one of the ones when I'm looking at a property, I pretend it's going to go vacant in a couple of years, because like it might, like you never know what's going to happen with COVID and businesses going bust. So analyze it like, okay, the property is going to be vacant next week, for instance. So that gives you the demand. But to answer your question about what types of ones I avoid, have that same mindset in terms of the type of asset you're looking at. So go, okay, in 10 years' time, is this business and industry going to be around? So like for me, at the moment, you can buy things like a petrol station on a really, really high yield, but I'm not going to touch it just because I don't know where petrol stations are going to be with electric cars in 10 years' time. There's also some added risk with those, is environmental factors. If the tenant does leave, you've got hundreds of thousands of dollars to fix it up, the site, so you actually can build something else on it. So there's risk there. Some other ones are like banks. You can get some really good yielding banks at the moment. But me personally, I don't know about you guys, I have not walked into a bank in 5+ years, and I won't. So if I get a bank that's on a 5-year lease, I am treating that like they're going to leave in 5 years' time. I'm not saying you don't buy one. If you buy something on a really, really good yield and it's a versatile space. So I know I've just badmouthed banks. I've actually bought a bank for a client before on the Sunshine Coast. I just mentioned it before. It's on a really good strip. Like, it's the busiest strip in town, and it's got a rock solid 5-year lease. So we're buying it with the premise that we think they're going to leave in 5 years' time, but we know the area is such in demand. We're getting in early, and we're going to have that kind of tenant. It'll probably take, retail tenants take a little bit longer than industrial. They're kind of sometimes 6 to 12 months. And a lot of that's because there's fit out costs. Like, if you get a cafe that comes in, they don't just kind of move in with some forklifts and they're done the next day. There's incentives you need to give them. There's the 3 months to build, the kitchens and things like that. So we've just assessed that risk, but we bought it at a good price. We got it at a 6.5% yield, whereas stuff on the street selling for 5.2, 5.4. So we're buying it knowing that risk, but at least we're aware of it and we're making a plan for it.
There you go. So Joe, what's your what points have you got about resi and its vacancy and risk?
Well, that's I mean, it's right there, isn't it? Your property sits vacant for 12 to 24 months. How do you feel about that? Like, how does that sit with you? Vacancy rates in the residential space for across Australia are sub 1%. So you're definitely going to be getting a rental in there. One of the other points, I guess, as well with commercial is the value of the property is linked directly to the lease. So like Steve was saying, if you get a 5 by 5 by 5 lease with Woolworths, that's an incredibly valuable lease, right? But if you're desperate and need a tenant and you want to drop your rent you need to drop your rent, you're going to be dropping it by percentage points, not by $10, $20, $30. You're going to be dropping it by $100, $200, $300 to be able to get that up. So in residential, if you want to get a lease listed, I'm just going to have to drop it $20 a week, right? That doesn't affect the value of your property. With residential, let's say you buy a $1 million property and it's a 5% cap rate, right? So that means you're getting $50,000 per year. Okay, so that's how much income's coming in. That's $960 a week. If you lose $100 a week, that's $860 a week that you get in. So down $100, which is $44,700 and odd. At 5% cap rate, the new value of your property is $894,400. You just lost $106,000 and the amount of time that you're constantly losing that money while having the place vacant. So that is one thing to be aware of in terms of risk. Also, if you're getting a CPI, a lease, and it's renewing at CPI inflation, it's got an inflation for 3%, it grows. That's all you can grow. Your property is only going to grow 3% over that period of time. So growth is tied into the lease value.
Joe knows I agree with him on this. And one of the other kind of risks with commercial is you're locked in for a long period with leases as well. So if you do, say, CPI increases on your rent and you're on a 5 or 7 year lease and the market's gone like it has in the last 3 years where rents have gone up 10 to 30% in the commercial space, you've actually lost out on that. Whereas residential, because most people have a 6 to 12 month lease, you get to the end of the 6 to 12 months and you bump up your rent and you realize that cash flow straight away. So that's one of the benefits of resi over commercial. However, then you've got the security argument as well. I know I'm getting rent for 5 years, whereas you don't know when the tenant's going to leave and come in and things like that. But again,
I'll just check. I'll just give him $20. I'll just drop $20 and then I'll get the rent there, and then they'll be ready to go. And one of the biggest things
also, I was going to say, it's a lot harder to do that in commercial. Theoretically, you could, like, if my property goes vacant, I could drop it by 10% and get someone in quickly. But because the leases are so long, it's risky, and most investors won't do that. They'll actually keep it at the fair market rent because they know it is going to be. And as soon as you get the tenant, a lot of tenants actually hang around for 10 years. So you don't want to get them on a 10% lower than market rent because that'll accumulate over time and you'll lose in the long run.
Yeah, makes sense. One of the points that I wanted to make is that you need much larger buffers in commercial as well. You really need to factor that in. Like if if your property is vacant for 24 months, you need to have $100,000 sitting there ready to go, more than $100,000, depending on the place. So whereas with residential, I'm trying to build my capital base. So as the equity grows in value, I'm able to take this money out because I know that my property isn't going to cost $100,000 in a year's time when it goes vacant. So I can reinvest that equity into a property and be able to re-leverage. With the commercial, you have to have that buffer. You need to really make sure that you have a large, substantial capital base there. So when the times get tough, you're okay.
Yeah, so I agree with you, Joe. I think you're exaggerating a little bit. You don't need $100,000 buffer. You just need to be able to pay the rates and the mortgage for that time. So like on $1 million property, you're talking like 20 grand a year. So most of the time I recommend, this is not financial advice, 1 to 2 years worth of things, depending on what property you have. However, you also got that cash flow to offset it as well. Because if I say I survive with my tenant for 3 years and I'm getting 40 grand a year cash flow, I'm building my own buffer with cash flow, which helps out financially with people. The other thing as well is you're less likely to have big maintenance issues sometimes with commercial. So like just a simple warehouse, there's not going to be any big kind of scary costs. Whereas we've all got residential properties. Like how many times have all of a sudden you've just been like, oh, far out, the roof's got leaking and there's $5,000 here and there. So you'll need a smaller one, I agree. But commercial's not as bad as you think kind of over the long term. If you are responsible for maintenance of the lease though, then be very wary. Like we mentioned before, like air conditioners off air, like an air conditioner is going to be $3 grand for residential. Commercial might be $20,000 if it's a big commercial. So just look at the type of property you're having and what are the risk profiles, what's in there, who's responsible for maintenance, and then what's going to happen if there's no tenant and you need maintenance issues as well. And that's one of the reasons why I'll avoid some commercials. Like I don't buy a lot of like cool rooms and things like that just because refrigeration is bloody expensive and I just don't want a part of it. I don't want that buffer. I'd rather buy one.
Yeah, as soon as fridge goes, I mean, you could spend
the annoying thing is they always seem to work while the tenant's there, and then they move out, and then when you try to put the new tenant in there, all of a sudden it's not working, and then
nobody's going to rent a the reason I brought that comment before, we've got Jane Slack-Smith who's even tuned in to watch, so she's not swayed to commercial based on what she's not picking up what you're putting down yet, Steve. But so
hey,
do you have any counter? I think I know this is not necessarily quite a knockout, but I think I'm favoring. I'll ask the audience what they think about who won this round, but I think we may almost be leveling it up. But have you got any final body blows to land on Joe before we sort of?
No, I actually think Joe wins this one. I mean, that's because I agree with him. I believe commercial long term is lower risk. But in terms of that statement, commercial property will sit there vacant for 12 to 24 months. Yep, you can buy commercial properties that sit there vacant for 12 to 24 months very easily if you don't know what you're doing. And part of a good commercial is trying to buy one where it's less than 6 months vacancy rate every 10 years or so.
Have you got any? I just want to pick up on that point that Polizzi said. Longer term, it's lower risk. What are your thoughts on that, Joe? From
Disagree.
Oh, okay, yeah. I knew you disagree, but
I mean it's different. It's different levels of risk and different type of people, right? Like if you were saying what's more risky, residential or commercial, again, it's going to be residential. Look at what the banks lend. They lend at 90% LVR, 95% LVR. The banks lend based on risk. That's how they give out their cash.
It depends what we're arguing, Joe, because like risk, yes. And I think that's our next topic. But in terms of vacancy, it just depends what you buy. If you go buy a Bunnings, for instance, I bought a trade Bunnings Centre in Perth before on a 10-year lease. They're not going anywhere for 10 years. So your residential properties are going to have way more vacancy than that one. However, if that went vacant or they decide to leave at the end of it, then I'm going to have a very bad time. I'm going to have a long vacancy period. So this is why I hate trying to argue commercial with people, because I can't make blanket statements because you have no idea if you're buying a Bunnings or a little warehouse or like a multi-industry warehouse. They're all different. Whereas residential, as I keep saying, you actually can compare apples with apples. You can look at 3-bedroom houses versus 3-bedroom houses. It's very rare you'll find even 2 warehouses that are actually the same square meter rates that then have the same office ratio to mezzanine floor ratios with the same tenant on the same lease at a same yield. It doesn't exist. So that's why with commercial, just look at each one on its own merits and then make a decision from there.
But before we move, and I think the audience has sort of said that Joe wins this one, but I want to throw this. This is Hayden, because Hayden's saying what's the net loss? And he's advocating commercially, I imagine. What's the net loss position when you drop the rent $20 a week in resi when you're only netting $50 a week? That's an interesting kind of.
A solid question. Solid question. I don't know, but it's not good.
Well, it's about 35% roughly. Don't quote me on.
Yeah, but you don't look at it that way though, because you're looking at the cash flow position. If your cash flow dropping from $3,000 a year down to $1,500 or $2,000 a year is going to affect your livelihood, property is probably not right for you. Go plan a different kind of investing forum. You're going to have, because as you mentioned before, Joe, with the unit block, maintenance just wipes all that out of the water anyway. So look at the net position, and you're going to have those things, and just make your buffers in place for no matter what asset class you're buying.
Yeah, I try to get a bit to make it somewhat controversial, but let's flow to the last point. This is the deciding thing, so you have to bring.
No, it's not. I think I've won every round.
No, what do you mean? You haven't won every round. You didn't. But well, the audience is not saying that, Joe. So I mean, it's not me who's making all these decisions. I mean, I'll probably, So this is, I haven't planned this to be 2-all going into last. This is purely, I hadn't really. So you have to put your best punches forward, put your best foot forward, I suppose. And this is the topic. So I think this is a fairly debatable thing. I don't think this is a cut and dry. I mean, maybe you could argue it is cut and dry, but
it is 100% cut and dry. What are you talking about?
but it's
see, I don't. What are you going to?
Let us go. See you guys.
Yeah.
No. I want to.
Just because you sponsor the show, Steve, doesn't mean you get a free pass.
But you own the show, so this is the hard part.
I didn't. You had an
Jeff was like, I'm going to make these questions very fair and even. I was like, these are not fair and even. These.
Well, I mean, as in they weren't all resi. There are some, but Steve had the chance to dispute these questions, so he's only. But
no, I'm an engineer background. I love it, and I love an argument.
So what are your thoughts on this one? How do you argue this one?
You want to go first, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, what residential is easy for the average punter and property person to understand. This is 100% true. There are, millions of people, 260,000 Australian property investors. Yeah, it's a lot easier, and everyone lives in a property. One of the things as well is the bank does the due diligence for you almost. Now, I don't mean to discredit my own role as a buyer's agent, but if you buy a dud property, the bank does a bank valuation on that property as well. And if that property comes in at a lower valuation, they're going to request more capital from you, kind of like what they, kind of do in commercial. They say, hey, you need to put more capital in here. Different thing. But they say, yeah, you can't buy that property. You're not going to do it because it's crap. So they do a full valuation. So
I disagree with you here, Joe. And I know that's the process, but with a residential property, they actually have more leeway. Like you can go buy a 500,000 residential and pay 550 for it and still get financed very easily. Commercial, they are brutal because you pay for the valuer. They cross-check everything and they're way more conservative. So I think it's actually less likely that you get a less accurate kind of commercial valuation because they're always on the low side. Then you've got things like typically more people buy at auctions for residential properties. So you can pay whatever you want, and then they consider that market rate. So you might be paying over what the actual market rate is, but the banks are going to say, oh, no, that was market rate. It was fair trade.
Yeah. Also, I guess like looking at it from a complexity standpoint, commercial property is so complex. Like there is not a chance that I would be going out there to go buy a commercial property by myself without someone like Steve, without a buyer's agent to be able to help me out that knows how to unpick. Like as Steve is saying, a business is the value of the product, right? The business of the fabricator that's been there for 10 years is far more valuable than the tech startup that's in that space. But why is that? Like, how do you actually measure the growth perspective? Well, this guy has income. Well, this guy is going to be the next, Steve Jobs. But that Steve Jobs is then going to move out of that property because he's going to, build a massive team. Yeah. And then also the due diligence phase, there's a lot more legal side of things. There's a lot more lawyers involved. A lot more things are negotiable. Am I right, Steve, in saying that? There's more things that you can
I agree. It is
negotiate on.
more complicated. However, it doesn't mean you're going to make a mistake necessarily easier. And I'll premise it this way. Okay, do you think buying a high density apartment or a house and land package is a good long-term residential investment?
No. Well, there's better purchases. There's better
So-
purchases.
So
Yeah,
why do
you're
why
not
do
going to get an
people buy-
argument from Joe on that one.
Yeah, so why do people buy them? If it's so easy to understand, why do people buy them?
There you go. No, you got me.
Yeah. No, so I agree with Joe. If you buy in a well-established suburb in a capital city and you've looked at some high-level numbers in terms of vacancy rates and median house prices, and there's no oversupply or flood zones or those big-ticket items, it is much quicker to do due diligence on a residential property and get it right. But you can still go buy duds. You can still go to buy the mining towns and the house and land packages. How many times, like I heard so many horror stories from people buying in Perth, like off the plan apartments in Perth 5 years ago that lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they've just got this asset that's negatively geared that's worth $100,000 less than what they bought it for. So you still need to do the work either way. You can be lazy with commercial and not burn yourself long term. Like if you, like I said before, buy a industrial warehouse and it's surrounded by a good residential suburb, and they're not building any more kind of residential industrial properties, and there's a demand for that thing, you'll be okay long term. You might buy a bit of a data, you might overpay, or your tenant might leave in 2 years' time because you haven't done the due diligence. But over 20, 30 years, you'll be okay. As long as you can handle that vacancy periods, you'll be all right. Whereas residential, same thing as commercial. If you try to get rich quick or you do something silly, you can still burn yourself. And this is the whole point of this property group, is just to help people to make sure you don't make those mistakes.
Yeah. Oh, what do you got to say? What do you got to say to that, Joe?
Pulling at the heartstrings of the Oz property community.
Please.
No, I totally totally agree. It is, for the everyday Aussie to go out there and try and crunch the numbers on a business, to understand cash flow, to understand what a profit and loss statement is and a cash flow statement, to understand these businesses a little bit more is very difficult. So there's no way to compare the due diligence and the level of rigor that you need on a commercial that you need on a residential. So I mean, risk. What is it? You can understand residential far easier, and that's not a bad thing. Like it's not a bad thing. It leaves open opportunity for commercial. Like Steve, like this is the crazy thing about the commercial buyer's agent space. Steve is one of the top experts. There are not many people out there. That's amazing. There are not many people buying commercial properties. So whenever they want to go, he's the man for it. He does all the due diligence and does all of that stuff for you, because it's not a massive pool to choose from. So yeah, no.
I'd say one of the advantages of commercial over the residential for this statement is most people don't put emotion into the commercial purchase. And this is why a lot of first-time investors and investors get it wrong in the resi space, is because
very good
exactly as your statement says, they live in it, so therefore they think they understand it. But everyone wants to live in a brand new house. Like, how nice is it having brand new kitchen, bathrooms, all that type of stuff? And then they apply that mindset of, if I want to live there, therefore everyone else will. But that's not how the resi market works. Like, we know existing stock, it doesn't have to be the nicest one. That kind of medium stock where it's just good established building properties, you'll get the best net result. And that's the thing. Like, people go, oh, I want to live near the beach, so I'm going to buy an apartment in Bondi. Not necessarily a good investment. Whereas someone going, oh, a retail fish and chip shop on Bondi Beach, that'll do well. Lots of people will walk past that. It's not an emotional one. It's actually a logical argument. So that's what I like about commercial. There's actually no emotion in it at all. Like, I treat it like a business transaction. Like, I'm buying a business, I'm buying into that business. Even though I don't own that business, I want that business to succeed, and that's why I analyze it that way.
Yeah. I'm not. I'm glad I'm not making a decision as to who wins this, because I think if I look at this statement, I think it's hard to disagree with Joe. But But
I can't believe I'm actually in the running to win this one. I thought this one was a guaranteed loss. I think I pulled a rabbit out of the hat.
Yeah, you've done well on this one, to be honest.
he makes some compelling.
This one is the one I was like.
I actually agree with you, Joe. That's the weird part.
Like, this was the one I did the least amount of research and thing on. I'm like, oh, this is a slam dunk. I don't need to write anything. I don't need to think of anything for this one. But I mean, it's just, yeah, it is what it is. And that's the thing. I'm not here to agree or disagree. It's just that commercial wouldn't exist. You don't start out in commercial. The average punter, if we're talking about the average punter here, does not start out in commercial. They start out in residential. They get there, they get going, they build up their asset base, they build it up to a point to then convert that into into a cash flowing thing that's going to, you know, provide your retirement. And there is a stage for everything. I mean, we'll probably have a bit of a summary, but that's pretty much it. There is a point in time when you do this thing. You do not use commercial as your first property investment if you are brand new to the world of property investing. I mean, would you agree with that, Steve? Like, let's just say you're 30 years old, you've got $50,000, maybe $80,000.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, like you and I agree with that. One of the points, like, this is going to kind of support you. You can be lazier when you're making a residential investment because there is a little bit less to do. Like, you can look at a place and go, oh, this is a nice street, things like that. With commercial, you can't be lazy because most of the time, just the amount of documents they send you, like, you go to buy a commercial property, they're sending you 20, 30 plus documents. Like, you're getting leases and service contracts and your P&L statements and rental ledgers. You're getting all these documents. It's very hard to pick those up and go, oh yeah, I'll ignore those and then move on to the next one. Whereas residential, a lot of people I know that have just went and looked at a property, not even done any research and signed a contract is just baffling. Like, to be honest, I sort of did that for my first one. I literally went and looked at the property and go, cool, let's go back to the office and sign the contract. And that was it. That was my due diligence.
Yeah. It's fun. It's fun to do that to start with, but then you might buy a dud, right? I guess this is where the group comes in the education.
And as we discussed before in the risk one, you can buy a much bigger dud with commercial. If you buy something that sits there vacant for 5 years, not only are you going to have to pay the mortgage and the property is going to be worth less, you actually shot yourself in the foot for your future investing, because good luck going to buy a residential property if you've got like $1 million commercial property that's sitting there vacant. You're done. So you've actually blocked your investing window over. And as we all know, time in the market is the most important thing. So if you're in that accumulation phase, you don't want to do anything that's going to harm you buying properties for that early phase. You want to kind of accumulate as quick as you can, so then you can have your exit strategy of pay down or buy commercial or whatever it may be. So
on that basis, I think Joe
on that bombshell.
I think Felice's thrown in the towel. He's done. Joe didn't even have. He'd have admitted he didn't do that much research on this one, so he could have absolutely hammered him. But unless anybody in the audience, so I think this could be a free 2 points decision. I don't think it was a knockout, because I like that Felice presented some very solid arguments. I'm not just saying that. I'm not surprised that he has. So yeah. So you go, Joe.
Well, one of the things I think is I had a lot of punches thrown towards, you know, commercial property, and you unpicked a lot of the unknowns of commercial, right? I can make a blanket statement like, well, commercial property doesn't grow. So it's good to get into the details and unpick that and go into the weeds of like, well, actually, it's just like residential. It's exactly the same. You can buy a crap property and you can buy a crap business. And if you don't know what you're doing, you can definitely stuff it up. But if you know what you're doing, that's where the opportunity lies. And I think that's actually one of the big points of commercial is there are fewer people in the industry and fewer people buying commercial property. Commercial property is valued, I think it was at 5.4 trillion, billion in Australia, and residential is about 10 billion. So if you can play and understand and learn about this field, there's going to be less competition, and that means there's going to be more opportunities, I find.
Well, one of the things I always hear people say, they always go, oh no, residential's safe because everyone needs a roof over their heads. My little funny counter argument to that is, where do you think the roof came from?
Stick huts again.
So commercial property, like every item you touch in your life has on average been through 10 plus warehouses before it even gets to you. So commercial is just as essential to having a roof over your head, but you just, like you said, you got to understand what you're doing. And this is why there's a whole property investing debate. And it's because you can pick and choose information to win your argument. Like I can do it either way. And everything changes. Like you can say, oh, don't buy Brisbane. It hasn't performed as well as Sydney the last 5 years. Cool. Over 30 years, it's performed about the same. So you can always just chop and change. And then most of the time people talk without actually any data to back it up. Like, and no offense to the group, there's a lot of people in the group, and I'm one of them, that just make big outlandish statements. There's no substance behind it. They just say this, kind of close their eyes and say the statement, and then people start agreeing and liking the comment. But it's you really got to dig deep on the numbers, and hence why me and Joe have a job, because we try to do it better than the other people.
And we have a group. But I was going to say, Joe, I just want to. Did you say the value of resi property is 10 trillion, Joe? So did you say
no 10 billion? 10 billion. Sorry, I said trillion, but yeah, I meant 10 billion for resi and 5.4, I think.
No, it's definitely 10 trillion. It's not billion. Like $10 billion is nothing.
Oh,
yeah,
there you go. Whatever it is.
And
it was really more of, it's like 50% more.
I know. Yeah.
Right,
sorry,
yeah.
But there were some cracking questions. So, or did one of you guys want to wrap up a summary before we get into Q&A, or do you want to just get straight into Q&A? Like, how do we want to?
I don't know. What's your summary of this? What's your summary of all of this, Jeff? Me and Steve been doing all the talking.
I was clicking on the origin score about half the time. So, if I'm very no, look, I think I'm just trying to think. Steve made so many good points. That the thing that I found that was quite interesting, that where he spoke about the risks and about the insuring sort of things, and about the cash flow side of things. So I didn't think about, because 10 billion is nothing. Okay, hi roll. Well, no, I mean, I don't have 10 billion buried in my backyard, but it's a different. So the thing I would say is that thing about cash flow. I didn't think about it that way, in the sense of, yes, you can have vacancy for 6 or 12 months in extreme circumstances, or in some circumstances, but then that potentially is made up for by having the higher cash flow, net cash flow as well. And that was the thing that, I mean, we all a lot of us know that commercial is net. Resi is generally gross. I wouldn't say always, but I think it most of the time is. I don't know many, unless you somehow negotiate it. I don't know why a tenant would pay all the outgoings. But anyway, beside that point. So I think that thinking about, like, seeing that on the screen and saying, oh, look, while you might have a 9% gross yield, having it at 3% after expenses is great. And you've mentioned it before about the capital growth in an area. So I think that's something to keep in mind as well, that if you're buying a commercial property in an area where there's not necessarily demand for it in residential, then there is potentially a greater risk that you might not see capital growth, because if the resi market doesn't grow, then the commercial might not grow either. The third point was on leverage, and I think that one wasn't heaps of surprises there, but yeah, I think that's kind of wraps it up. And I don't know, there's a couple other things, but those are, I focus a lot on capital growth and cash flow. So, but the risk as well.
But that was one of the arguments I was trying to make with the capital growth thing. Like it is actually a myth, because if that's the argument, you're saying in 50 years' time that residential is going to be 3-4 times the cost of commercial. And I can't see how that's physically possible, because everyone's going to then start buying commercial.
Yeah, exactly. People are going to flow into that market because there are greater returns for them to get a bigger opportunity. And that's what controls a market, is the supply and demand, and how much demand there is for an opportunity to get a free yield.
We got the exact numbers from Tom.
25% LVR. Happy days. Thanks, Tom.
Sure.
Well, what was I going to say? Yeah, that's the biggest point with commercial, is if you can get a 10-year lease on a Bunnings trade shop, and all you're doing is getting a cap rate of 7%, and you're paying 4% on the mortgage, you're getting a 3% return on your money, just guaranteed every single year for doing nothing. That's all. You just have to, you're just getting that margin and taking it with you along the journey. And then if someone does leave, you've got 4 years worth of expenses that have accumulated. You just sit them in your account, and then 1 year goes down, 2 years go down. You've still got 2 years worth of value. Like, I 100% agree that commercial needs to be a part of everyone's decision, but only when you have a large capital base where you want to transition that into that cash flow, because otherwise you can generate so much more growth quickly, and you can use a renovation and a subdivision. You can do all these special tactics that don't take a PhD in, you know, mechanical engineering to be able to do it. But they're both fantastic assets, and everyone needs to think so closely about commercial, especially if you have a couple of mil in the kitty.
And that's why we buy property. Like I love property because of leverage. Like I actually don't care at all about a house or an apartment or a commercial property. Like it's just a vehicle for me. But me giving 10% and the bank's giving me 90% loan, cool. I get to start playing with some pretty big numbers, and if I get it right, I make some big numbers. In saying that though, you can also lose big, and that's what we spoke about before with the off the plans and things like that. You can leverage your losses as well. But that's why we like properties. You get to play with big numbers, and you can get out of work sooner if that's what your goal is.
I wanted to. This wasn't so much I agree. There's that leverage kind of component, and property is a vehicle rather than it's a game of houses with finance in. Sorry, the other way around. The game finance with houses involved. This is an interesting one. It's a statement, but commercial property value is only as good as the lease on it. What would your thoughts on that be, Steve?
Yeah, so I agree. It's worth less a lot of the times if it doesn't have a tenant. However, there are some markets in Australia where vacant properties sell for more because there's more owner-occupier businesses that actually want to move into it.
Which markets are they? Are we talking your Byrons? Or?
Some suburbs in the Sunshine Coast and Gold Coast, they'll sell more vacant because there's more businesses that want to move into it. But instead, it's still got value. So, like, it's not like it drops to zero. There's plenty of places, like, I see lots of vacant, like office spaces even that sell for ridiculous amounts. So they've still got a value. They've just got less. And I agree with the statement, but you got to buy in that mindset. And like Joe said before, plan for that buffer. If the property is vacant when you need to sell, you're not going to have a fun time. Or if you need to refinance your portfolio when it's vacant as well, you're not going to have a fun time. So that's part of the planning process when long term.
Yeah, I think this is a point you should have raised, Polizzi. It said everyone thinks they understand property. The stats say otherwise. Why didn't you say that there's only what 3% of people own? Actually, I think it's more than that. It's probably about 10-12% own more than 2 properties. You could have used that number.
It doesn't matter. The stats you can manipulate to whatever you want because you can choose different time frames, different locations, different types. And then what we actually do, and me and Joe can never say this, any buyer's agent that says they guarantee growth, just run a mile, because if it was that easy, we'd be living on our private island in the Bahamas drinking pina coladas. There is a human aspect to it. Like when COVID hit or whatever, there's things where the economy won't change at all, but property prices will jump by 10%. So what's the driver for that? You can do all this data that you want, but there's still a human element to it.
Yeah. Throw your questions in, people, because there's a great question. I'd love to hear Joe's thoughts on this one, because I maybe might need to get Polizzi to jump in at some stage. But so would you guys agree with the average resi asset is better than the average commercial asset, but a high quality commercial is better than a high quality residential? That's interesting. I don't know about that statement. I mean, what?
I don't know. You want me to answer that? I think I don't know. How to answer that. If a high resi, is it the same? It's the same thing. Like, do you want a commercial or do you want a resi? A high quality resi is great, and a high quality commercial is great. A low value resi is not so great, and then low value. It just really depends on what your goals are and where you are in those stages that we were talking about. That's kind of my answer to that. I don't know if you understood it.
I'll answer it a little bit differently. So, like, I'd say resi's easier to compare average returns versus really, really high quality returns and good returns, because there are more like for like. But commercial, it actually varies. What someone actually values is a good commercial changes. So, like, I've actually bought commercial properties that my clients have said no to, and I've bought it because I valued it as a good commercial. And I'll use an example. Like, say we've got 2 body corporate warehouses next to each other. One's on a 5.2% net yield, but has a fresh 5-year lease. And then the one next door to it has 1 year left on the lease, but is a 5.6% net yield. Which one's actually better? And if I ask 50 people, 25 will say one, 25 the other. Most of my clients will actually choose the 5-year lease one. They want the security of 5-year lease. I personally would buy the 5.6% one because I know part of my due diligence, I actually call the tenant and I talk to the tenant. And if they say, oh, yeah, we're going to sign on the next 5 years, it's all sweet. Why wouldn't I want the high yielding one? I'll get them to sign the lease early and move into it that way. So that's the opportunity I can get that way. But if I'm buying for 70-year-old Mabel, I probably will try to convince her to buy the fresh 5-year lease one because that's a little bit lower risk for her. So there's no right answer. People have like, what's a good quality asset? One close to the CBD or far out, a high yield, long lease, long-term tenant or new business or expensive fit out, mezzanine area size versus floor size. There's different bang for bucks in different locations. It's impossible to say what's a good quality asset. And you don't know what a good quality asset is going to perform like. Like this is the whole thing with investing. We're trying to make as best educated guesses as we can for the next 10 years to make as much money as we can.
Well, where do you see commercial going over the next couple of years? Like I feel like there's been a big shift in lifestyle movements and that's affected the inner cities but where do you see the market in the commercial space going?
Yeah, so similar concept to residential. I actually see a lot of the lifestyle areas performing really well. So then flowing on from that, the commercial properties there will flow on very well. Like I was mentioning Sunshine Coast, there's some of the tightest vacancy rates in Australia, and it's a lifestyle location because people are moving there and they can't keep up with stock. I actually went to the commercial town hall meeting last year, and they're out of commercial stock up till 2030. So they've got through it all already. So there's this huge demands for there. The normal question I get on sales calls is what happens with interest rates rise? That'll slow down capital growth. At the moment, we're seeing kind of 10% per year. I think that'll come off for the next few years. However, as we also mentioned before, rents are kind of jumping up 10 to 30%. So that's going to kind of offset it there. My counter argument to most residential investors is if they say, oh, cool, commercial's based on the cap rate, therefore you're not going to have capital growth. What is their argument for residential? Because if we have higher interest rates and the yields drop even more, who's looking at a 2% net yielding residential property going, oh, that's a good buy, I'll jump on that. They're going to want to put their money somewhere. And as I showed you in my cash flow spreadsheet before, commercial's still very attractive, even at 5-6% interest rates. So that I think we're actually going to see a bigger shift of investors move there. So like if we're a small pool now, I think in 5 years' time, there's more resources out there as well. Like there's like
that's 100% right. Like
that.
It's becoming so much easier to do. It's becoming easier to do the due diligence and know the stuff that you need to know because of the data. It's hard. Don't get me wrong, but there is more stuff out there. So yeah, it definitely is going to get.
5 years ago, there was only a couple books on the market, and they were very specialized. They were like, "Oh, this is how to buy a retail," and I was like, "How does this not exist?" And then I spent the 2 years writing it. But now there's multiple podcasts you can listen to. There's like 3 different ones I know that are really good. You've got multiple books on the market, plenty of articles and buyers agents you can follow and things like that. So no, I think there'll be a shift to commercial.
Yeah, and also I'm seeing it already from my clients coming to me and saying, "Hey,
he's got a delivery."
Yeah, well, this is the great thing about the UK. In the UK, you get an Amazon and they'll deliver it same day. Like
legit. So literally booked one.
Yeah, exactly. He ordered something just before this call and now it's arrived. It's sensational.
My bid as well.
I don't know where was I going with that. I'm actually seeing more people flying to Cashflow now. It used to be more of like, hey, let's get that growth. Let's have a look more at the 4, 5, 6% yields and see what we can get there. We want to above 5.5% yields. That's kind of what I'm seeing out there in the market, which is
a hypothetical. Here we go. Yes, an interesting one. What would you do with say 1 million in resi and commercial?
So what would you? Yeah, what would you do with 1 million, commercial or resi? What would you do with 1 million, Steve?
So this is probably an argument for you, Joe, where you can't buy with the same amount of deposit. You can't buy $1 million commercial and $1 million resi. It's actually because of the difference in deposit. But if I just got given $1 million now, well, let's assume we're leveraging. So I got given kind of $350,000 and I want to buy $1 million commercial. If I'm starting out, just keep it as low risk as possible. Just buy something boring that's surrounded by residential properties, well established. And these comments still apply for residential as well, that you know the numbers are going to stay the same. So don't go out and buy like on the edge of a city where there's lots of green fields and they're going to be building more warehouses or things like that. I would stick to industrial because you'll get some comfort in the numbers. You can like look up other ones like in the same complex. You can see what they rent for per square meter, what they sold for per square meter, find ones that went vacant, how long they were vacant for. Whereas the other asset classes like retail, like if you're buying a little strip of 10 shops, they might not have been a vacancy there for 5 years. So who knows what the vacancy period is? So that's a lot harder to get some comfort in the numbers. So I'd say go to a nice little $1 million warehouse in a Brisbane, Adelaide, or Perth or something like that. That's just well established, good tenant, decent lease, decent yield, and just whet the appetite, just dip the toe in.
Yeah, I think that would be the way to go. Get super secure, and just like what you do when you buy a residential property, get your feet wet with something that's safe, secure, and ready to go. And then when you understand it a little bit more, you can start to do more things. But if I had $1 million right now and it was let's just say $350,000 cash to buy $1 million asset, I would be buying a property that I could add value to. I'm still young, so I want to accumulate as much as I can, but I will be eventually. So buying a property that can be renovated at the front house and then subdivided at the back, so you can add an extra property, or that it will be subdivided, you knock it down and put 2 or 3 onto it. I just bought a corner block that allows you to put 3 on it. It's got a perfectly good house there. It's going to last 20 years. You knock that down, you put 3 houses up, and you're up 550,000 in revenue. So that is where I'd be putting my cash. But then when I've got my large nest egg of $5 million of net, I want a cash flow. I want to be able to use that and get a 4% gross yield on 4 million. Net yield. What would that be? So if I had $4 million,
you get better than 4%, but you probably get at least.
Yeah, what would I get? What would you get me, Steve? What would you get me?
4 million. Like what type of property or what yield I'd get?
What yield?
The yields don't change too much, but you'll generally buy between like a 5.5 and a 6.5% net yield. It'll just depend what you're buying. Like I said, if you buy Bunnings, you'll get lower. If you buy a little retail strip in a regional town, you'll get 6.5%.
So that's about 160. Let's say that's about $200,000 net, Joe, on a $4 million.
Oh, I want to make a bit of a point what Joe said about how he's going to do some value add projects. And I agree, when you're young and you want to be aggressive, do it. Don't sacrifice borrowing capacity because of it, though. Because I find
$2.6 million?
Wait, yeah, sorry.
That's not right. That's 260,000.
260.
Yeah. So go on.
Sorry. Go on, Steve. You had a really good point there.
Yeah. So do realize the value. If you're going to do like a subdivision buy, but don't sacrifice serviceability by trying to buy a development potential property. And what I mean by that is I get a lot of people like say their budget's, I don't know, 500,000, and they'll go buy an inferior product where they'll buy like a huge corner block with 1,200 square meters going, I can subdivide that in 10 years time. I would much rather go buy 2 properties individual that you can't subdivide and have twice as much rent coming in, because then you're not going to harm your serviceability. So keep that in mind as well. Joe's at a different point to most investors because he's got a good nest egg and he's good serviceability. But when you're starting, I just see so many people that want to be developers, but no, focus on fundamentals first.
Yeah, very good point. And it's funny, it is always corner blocks. You always see a corner block with 1,200 square meters and you're like, no, I can subdivide it into 4. Yeah, but right now you can't afford that. You can't afford it to sit there.
You also don't get any more rent for it, people. So you end up spending an extra $100,000 or $200,000 for the land. The rent's the same. So you're actually pushing your service.
Larger council rates, even more net loss.
Yeah. I get a lot of people say the same thing with the granny flat strategy. They're like, oh, I'm going to spend 150, 200 grand building a granny flat because they'll give me $350 a week. Cool. They should have spent that money on another property. So yeah, they've got a nice little cash flow now, but you could have bought another property that had grown in value and used the rent that way. But again,
if you're tapped out with serviceability, this is why all these different strategies work at different points in time. If you're tapped out in borrowing capacity, but you can get a construction loan and build up a cash flow, then you get more cash flow from the granny flat, which then allows you to go again and then buy another property. But then you've already spent 170 grand on capital on a granny flat, and you're like, oh, now I've got to save my deposit again.
Like you said, it just depends where you're at. Like I see a lot of people that, especially when they're about to have a child, that can be a great strategy because they know, cool, banks might not touch them for a year or 2. Let's get that close to that period. And inversely for commercial as well. If you start talking to your broker and they're saying, hey, look, you're running out of serviceability, this is your last one, then you're capped out. that's probably when it's worth considering a high yielding asset like the little apartment blocks or a house in granny flat or a duplex or a commercial property, just to try to boost up that cash flow.
This is a potentially. I hope you don't mind us asking about your mistakes. It's too late. I've kind of already done it. This is from Quade. So somebody said, "What mistakes have you made in commercial property investing, Steve? Have you made any?"
I'm a pretty boring investor, so I haven't made too many like mistakes. The ones I normally see people do is just they try to get rich quick. They go out and they buy the 7% yielding one in a market that's 5.5% yielding, thinking they've outsmarted the market, and they've just bought a dud. Like say they buy like a retail shop and it's one street back from the main street, and they think they're a genius because they boast to everyone in the forums going, "Oh, look at my yield, this is the best purchase in the world." I can almost guarantee you when that property goes vacant, that will not be the best property in the world and they will not be boasting about it. So just buying against risk is the biggest thing I would say, and that's the biggest mistake. You will have ups and downs. I bought some like a CrossFit gym for some clients in Brisbane and Perth and things like that. During COVID, they were still positively geared, but they lost some income. Like when you give rental incentives for 3 or 6 months, that year the cash flow goes from 30 grand to 15 grand. That's not a great outcome, but it's not debilitating. But I'm a bit different to some of the other buyers agents out there. I don't just chase yield. I buy boring properties, good locations, good tenant, long lease, low vacancy rates. I'm not trying to get rich quick here.
Oh damn, it's a bit sad. I was balance all the way.
I saw this one. Yeah, it's cut your teeth on residential, build up your equity, learn the ropes as serviceability tightens up, then go into commercial. Obviously, it's a blanket statement and not financial advice, but this is why we do, strategy sessions and plan it out and map out what you're actually got to do. But it's not bad like that. That makes sense.
For 90% of investors, that is spot on. But 10% of people have different circumstances. I've got really wealthy clients that have never owned a residential property and they've got $3 million sitting in the bank because they've gone all in on their business and they've made lots of money in their business. And then they're so burnt out, they actually want to get out. They want to sell up and go travel the world for a few years. I'm not going to buy them a negatively geared residential property. Cool, we talk commercial. And then like the examples I used before about like a difference when you're 20-year-old versus a 65-year-old, just what you're trying to achieve over what time frame.
Yeah. So the person, so Quade said, thanks, Steve, on that, on your response. What I'm going to ask her, I'll ask a question, and we've got one more from the audience. I'm interested to know what things would you? I mean, it's a very cheesy question, but what would you, knowing what you know now, what if anything would you change about your property journey?
Oh, okay. I admittedly put my hand up. I've bought a lot of duds in my portfolio. I've actually tried to get rich quick, and early on, before I was a commercial investor, I was trying to buy really, really high cash flow properties, like just stuff that was really, and like the example Joe used. And you buy it thinking like one was I bought a townhouse in Foster, which is a few hours north of Sydney. It was a nice little investment. Bought it for 112 grand in 2016, and it rented for $280 a week. The tenant moved out, and then I couldn't get a tenant for 6 months. And this is the whole vacancy argument. It's just wrong area, wrong time. And then I had to throw about 30 grand renovating it. I had to do new kitchens, bathrooms, freshen up. So then I ended up selling it for 180 grand. But by the time I paid the renovation and had that vacancy period, I didn't actually make that much money. I made like 20 grand, 30 grand, like not enough. I should have just bought, like it was early on, it was number property 3, I think. I should have just bought another blue chip property and good house on a good block and just getting that way. But I was too much of a property lover. Like as soon as I had 30 grand in my account, I'm like, oh, what can I buy with this 30 grand? And I'd be looking in Moree and regional towns and being like, oh, this is great, I can buy this. I should have just chilled, taken a step back, worked hard, saved hard for another year or two, and then bought another good quality asset. And it was my fault. I had a good passive income, but I also bought duds. I'd much rather have the extra $1 million equity now than that extra 20, 30 grand a year cash flow that I had.
Yeah.
There
you go.
Yeah. I like the way I like to think about it is you're doing it for the growth, right? You're using residential for growing the asset base, because what is $100 a week doesn't mean anything to me. And then 5% growth, the 7% growth does mean a lot. At the end of 2 years, I've got $100 a week or I've got $100,000 in capital growth, which I can then use for it. But you need to make sure that you're balancing all of that. You can't just go, let's go buy a blue chip Bondi, penthouse suite because we can get that. That's not going to help your serviceability in any way. So it's all such a fine balance. And this is it. Finance is a finance.
I told you about this on the last time I was on. So one of my other purchases was I bought an apartment in Cairns for $30,000, and that rented for $180 a week. So on paper,
silly not to.
Yeah, but it ended up costing me about 36 grand by the time you pay like stamp duty and legals and things like that. I'm like, this is brilliant. Banks wouldn't lend to it though because it was under the square meter sizing rate. So I actually bought it. I actually sold my car at the time. It was the first time I bought like a nice fancy car. And I'm like, I'm going to sell this and buy a property instead. I bought that. Had to use cash. That was a silly move as well because I didn't leverage. Like I said before, the whole purpose of residential investing is leverage. I should have put that 36 grand into 150, 200 grand worth of debt and then have the capital growth. And I would have made way more than 30,000.
Yeah, exactly. Because you'd be owning an asset you'd be putting 10% down, and then you would be owning an asset that's worth 90% more, and you'd be able to then grow. Because all you need to do, if you put a 10% deposit down and the property grows 10%, you've got 100% return on investment. You've gotten your money back. So as soon as it goes beyond that, as soon as it goes 20%, as soon as your property goes 20%, you've just made, like for me, the first property, a guarantor loan. I put no money into it. Infinite returns. You put, so.
This is a whole share argument. People will go, oh, you get a better return. You do if you're getting like a 7 to 11% return there, but not with leverage. Like you just said, the example you use, you've just made 200% on your initial investment.
Yeah. The only thing I'd say about that is it's on paper, so you haven't actually made. Of course, you've made it on paper, but
and this is the beauty of it, right? You can you have to sell your shares to be able to get that income up, and then you have to pay tax on it. I can't. I can just pull my equity out from the bank and put that into another property without having to pay tax on it. It's even better. I mean, the banks will only lend up to 80%.
There are risks. Like if we don't know what you're doing in residential commercial, you're also leveraging losses. Commercial, shares, you might lose your life savings, but you'll end up on zero. Residential and commercial, you can end up on negative hundreds of thousands of dollars and literally cripple yourself financially. So everyone gets into property, and because we've had an awesome 5 years and think it's easy, get into it. No, I can tell. I've been doing this now for like 8 years. A lot of the people in Perth and Darwin and other locations, they've had a really bad time. So it's not all rosy and sugar coated. You still got to do your work.
Yeah. That's there was a great question by Matt, but I'd love to, but that was a long question. I could answer it in a couple of sentences, but I think this one, given the discussion we'll get this one up. Otherwise, that one we could talk about. For this one's an interesting one, I think, for people. What's the minimum price point for a good quality?
Great question.
Commercial. Yeah, actually, I give you what would Steve do on this. So generally, I'm buying around at 300,000 is the starting point. That'll get you a nice little kind of warehouse in a Brisbane or a Perth or something like that. Benefit of those is one, it's really cheap, so you can get into it. The negative is you're going to get a really small quality tenant. So it's going to be a average Joe Tucker's electrical services, and he's going to be working from there. As we mentioned before, most small businesses go one or two ways. They're either going to close up shop or they're going to expand and move on. So you'll actually cycle through a new tenant probably every 2 to 4 years on one of those 300 grand ones. The benefit is the vacancy rates are really tight because there's lots of sole traders that will just come in and jump on it. However, you're not going to get a long lease. Average Joe's electrical services is not going to sign a 5-year lease. He's going to be on a 12-month or a 24-month. Then by the time you pay property management costs and the leasing fees and all that, that'll erode it that way. But he mentioned some people were saying, you have to start $1 million. That's just some buyer's agents, and that's because they've got hundreds of clients on their books and they can't fill the books, but they still exist. I'm buying 2 or 3 a month in that kind of price point.
Yeah, interesting. Well, it's a bit of a misconception as well, because it's even in the question. Would you say you need a mill? Like that's the preconceived notion around the commercial side of things. You can actually buy a lot less.
You can go buy a car spot for $20,000. I'm not saying doing it. Don't. It doesn't have a land component, but you can get a good return. You can go buy a car spot and get a 20% net return, but capital growth, who knows, kind of thing.
And try trying to sell it.
Well,
I don't know, Jeff. This one, I think we can get through.
Oh,
this
of course.
one.
I'm just thinking it's we're almost at a 2-hour mark, and I want to respect Polizi's time. It looked like you're fading, so I can dig in.
Let's knock this one out. He's put the effort in.
He's asked the question again.
Oh, he's keen.
Why
Come on, Matt.
He wants
Okay.
it. Can I jump in? I mean, I love to hear
You do it, mate. This is all you. My throat's sore. You know, Steve's exhausted. He's starting his day, sweating bullets.
Yeah. That's why I want to get him out to the beach, poor bloke. He's maybe got a few more calls.
I've actually got a massage booked after this, which is the really arrogant thing.
Nice one.
This is what happens. This is what happens. This is what you can do with commercial.
Yeah. So with this one, why not buy, develop, and sell? So I'm assuming Matt or Matthew that you haven't done a development before, or maybe you have. But the reason why is transaction costs and just tax as well. Because not to say don't do it, and it's a topic that people I'm going to do a live in a couple of weeks or whenever it is. And I'll talk about this is why one of the reasons why I would have loved to have kept the development, because yes, I think we made 100 or 150K on paper. So we did make that, and that was after GST being paid and all that. So but then of course you've got to pay capital gains tax, and you have to then, if you're going to keep doing projects, you got to pay stamp duty. And I know that some things are doing, you can do a once-off fee. You can do a stamp duty as a what should we call it, as an annual fee, which makes it a little bit cheaper. But I just think the reason why, yes, it may be in theory faster, but how much of that pie are you losing? Let's just say you've got whereas buy and hold you can potentially refinance provided you've got borrowing capacity. So that's why I necessarily wouldn't. But what are your thoughts?
I'd like to answer this. So you can buy, develop, and sell, and you can make lots of money. I've got friends that are developers, and they make truckloads of money doing that. But it's a job. It's you're no longer playing the capital growth
You're an
game.
employee.
Well, because you're not even that. The whole point why we're talking on this podcast was we're looking for capital growth, which is holding long term. Property then is no longer property. It's just a product. You're buying pens and selling pens at an inflated price and making money that way. So it's a job, and you can do very, very well at it. You can also burn yourself massively with it. There are so many risks with doing developments, especially at the moment. If you'd bought a site, I don't know, a year ago and build costs and budgeted the build costs, and now trying to do that with 30, 40% extra build costs, good luck making your 20, 30% profit margin work. Like you are having a tough time. So it's just a job. You can do it, and you can make a lot of money, but you lose out on that capital growth side of it.
Yeah. Plus, there's just the transaction costs, and of course, speak to your accountant on that. But there's probably no.
Don't worry about that, Jeff, because you should be taking that into account. If you're a professional developer, you take that into account. You're looking at profits. Yeah, it's just the problem is on social media, everyone talks a big game. They go, "Oh, I bought this for $1 million, sold it at 1.4, made 400K." They didn't. They made probably 200K or 150 after all the expenses. It just sounds good, but if you're doing it as a career. You're taking that, and you can still make, most of the developers I know make 15 to 25%. Like it's not bad, but you're also spending 2 years of your life doing a development. And as I've done one development, it is a horrible experience. Like it's nothing ever goes to plan.
Yeah, tell me about that. Financing can be a challenge, and as long as you're factoring in. Because you'll be able to, provided you got the deposit and you factored in where you're going to get the deposit from, you can get private funding at your sort of 8 to 10 to 12%. So you can get funding, but as long as you've accounted for that, because if you haven't, if you think you may get resi lending or commercial lending at 4 or 3 or 4%, and then all of a sudden you can't, then your holding costs blow out to and then your transaction so. I know a lot of people should factor in if you're doing it for a job, but it's not all that glamorous. It can be.
It's a tough job as well. They like every property developer I know works like 13, 14 hour days every day. They're not sitting there in the lounge chair just watching their mansion get built. Like it's a job. It's a full-time job.
You got to search.
Yeah, totally agree. This has been an awesome chat, Steve. I think what it's unpacked is the eccentricities between commercial and how easy it is to bundle these in together and think, that it's too hard, it's too complex. But I think you really unpacked a lot of value and shone a bit of light on, you can buy a property for 300,000 that it's not going to be vacant for 6 to 12 months or 9 months. There are low vacancies in that. But still, you need to have that expert due diligence. And I think that
what I actually took from it, Joe, is I actually saw lots of similarities. I thought it was just going to be a bit more headbutting, but I actually saw a lot of crossovers, which was quite nice because it's property. It's just a different type of property.
Yeah. There we go. We're both winners.
I won too. I was the best referee on the call.
I love that. Steve, thank you very much for running us through that, mate. How can people get in touch with you and talk about the commercial world? Because that is what's most important.
Yeah, just stalk me on social media on my website. So just type in my name on Facebook or go to policeyproperty.com and just shoot me a message. And I get back to everyone within normally a day. So yeah, just shoot me a message.
Great. Happy days. Jeff, anything you wanted to add on there?
No, just I'd like to think, I know you're both preparing behind the scenes. Maybe Leezy was doing his meditation and having his kale smoothie. But it's all preparation. So I appreciate, I know you spent over 2 hours here, both of you, and appreciate you jumping on and sharing your wisdom with the audience and coming along for the journey. Thanks. Great discussion as usual. It was. I'm going to go and let you enjoy your massage, please. Well done. You've earned it.
Let's do it. Let's go buy a property, guys. Catch us later.
Hey, everybody.